Welcome to the Creative Brookline podcast. My name is David, and I'll be your host. Today, we are with Ruth Ginsberg-Place, who is a local artist based right here in Brookline, as well as Boston, Massachusetts. Ruth has experiments with a lot of different mediums in her life, but her work mostly focuses around the relationship of art and the natural world. So, Ruth, welcome to the Creative Brookline podcast. We're very happy to have you with us today.
Thanks. Yeah, this is delightful. I love Brookline. I love what they've done for the arts. So thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Something we were just talking about before we started was just how similar your name is to Ruth Ginsberg, and you seem to get that a lot. Is that correct?
Well, because we both have three words in our name, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so the reason I use Ruth Ginsberg-Place is because there are a lot of Ruth Ginsburgs in the world, and when I became somewhat known as an artist, I thought, well, it's good to have this other piece. I get it, asked it all the time, sometimes in the form of, I think I know you. I said, no, I don't think so. Are you famous? So sometimes I'll say, yes, I'm famous. It's kind of fun. But I get that every few weeks, so it's fun. I like her. If I didn't think she was terrific, I might not enjoy it.
You grew up in Brooklyn, New York, correct?
That's right.
What was that experience like when you were growing up in the city and getting involved in art, or what age did you really start to get involved in art?
Growing up in Brooklyn was great. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood near the water. It was really, really great. I was kind of left on my own a lot. Both my parents worked, so I kind of entertained myself in various ways, outdoors or in the house. And, I like to make things a lot. And I used to make furniture out of matchbooks and very creative stuff like that. And I think maybe as a young person, as a child, I used art as magic in a way. Like when I wanted a puppy, I would do a painting of a puppy and give it to my mother. Happy Mother's Day, Mom, and that kind of thing. When I was about 11 or 12, my aunt bought me oil paints for my birthday, and my mother bought me a full-size easel, which she carried on the subway because she didn't drive. And so I tried teaching myself oil painting, and the first painting I think was of chickens. Somebody had given me chicks. And the second series of paintings were self-portraits. So one was an idealized self, like an all-American girl kind of thing, and the other was my inner self. I had very red face and dark, big eyes.
And how old were you when you were doing these portraits?
Maybe 12, 13.
Really?
Yeah. So then I think when I was about 14 or so, a girlfriend of mine said that there were Saturday art classes for teens at the Brooklyn Museum, which is a very nice museum. And so I asked my parents if I could go there. So for all through my high school years, I went there and mainly did figure painting from live models, nude models, and, met other kids in these small classes that were really interested in art. And it was great because they had wonderful painters who taught there. And around the same time, I happened to see a show either at the Museum of Modern Art in New York or Contemporary Crafts Museum. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. And the show was of 5 women who did sculptures made out of fiber with woven or knotted or various techniques, but they were just phenomenal. I was completely blown away. I'd never seen anything like it. I'd never been personally interested in fiber. It's just the term used for artworks made out of rope, yarn, using a variety of techniques. So it's really a medium, like painting uses paints. fiber uses fibers. So I was just totally struck down by that. And so not long after I started in graduate school, I decided this is really what I want to do. I have no background in this. I don't know what it's all about, but it just was pretty thrilling for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided to go to art school. My parents really wanted me to go to a school that had liberal arts and art.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to go to Syracuse, which had a College of Fine Art, but unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, most of the day was spent in art classes from 9 to 5, 9 to 4 maybe, and then you would stick in 1 or 2 liberal arts classes.
What was that experience as a fiber artist? Because I personally have not heard that term before. Could you talk a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, sure. So my undergraduate work was based on Bauhaus curriculum, which is painting, drawing, design, and so that's really what I did a lot of as an undergraduate, and I did a lot of figure work, worked from the figure as well as other subject matter. Then I had several years in New York working at a variety of jobs, which I won't relate to because there were so many. I mean, they were a lot of different things.
Struggling college days, as we're all used to.
Struggling days was interesting, and at that time, I somehow didn't have the notion that you had to know about anything or be good at anything to get a job. You applied and you got hired or not. So that's what led me to like ghost writing. But it was a good art school.
And what was it like coming to the Boston area? Like, how different was it than being in New York? Because New York is massive, obviously.
Right. Yeah, sure. It really seemed like a small town to me at the time. I was surprised things closed up at night and people didn't give you eye contact and things. New York, you maybe have too much eye contact, but so it took a while to get adjusted, but I love Boston. I'm lucky that I just happened to land here.
Mm-hmm. So could you tell me a little bit why you like the Brookline area so much?
I like Brookline because it's a liberal community. It's very progressive. It's urban. It's a walking place. It has good transportation.
Mm-hmm.
It has parks, many, many parks and ponds. And it's diverse. And I can't think of a better place I'd like to live.
Do you have a favorite spot in Brookline you like to frequent? Either to just go get a coffee or to like sit outside and like do some drawing.
Yes, my favorite spot is Leverett Pond, and I've done a lot of photography there. It's 5 minutes from my house. I love it.
Great. You said you've had some commissioned work done, correct? And you said you have a really impressive piece that you got recognized for when you were out in the Midwest, correct? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, actually, although I've exhibited in a couple of museums, I've only had one museum purchase a work of mine, which is the Art Institute of Chicago, which totally thrilled me. When I was teaching in Illinois, I was in 2 group shows at the Art Institute and one later on, and they bought one piece. So that's very, very nice. And I've had work commissioned for Johns Hopkins University, a photograph, and other places, Federal Reserve Bank and places like that. It's fun to do commissions sometimes because you're given parameters and you have to work within them, so it's really challenging and fun to do something that is yours, your style, your expression, but within a determined subject matter or medium. So that's really fun.
Has it been a struggle for you at all to do commission work?
When I was a fiber artist, I worked with some agents, and which I was very fortunate to have. And so between them and just my reputation, I did get a lot of commission work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. Now and then what people wanted was really just felt I couldn't do that. I mean, that would happen rarely if they had some, very rigid ideas or criteria. But generally, I liked it.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit more about other exhibitions that you've done, specifically in the Brookline area?
Mm-hmm. Well, in Brookline, I have been doing open studios every year, which, and then places I've exhibited are the library.
Mm-hmm.
That was a group show. And let's see, I had one one-person show at Town Hall and one two-person with my husband, who's a good photographer. And that was fun also. That was sort of like a road trip exhibition of photographs with some narrative. I had a show of my prints, wood blocks, and monotypes at the Brookline Bank. They have a little gallery.
You've done another project in Brookline, correct? It's something called it was like a photo project that you did with seniors and fifth graders.
Right. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, I know that's a good question. Yes, I did something which involved seniors from the senior center, a small group of seniors who were interested, and fifth grade Girl Scouts. And at that time, I bought some disposable cameras and picked a site which was, I can't remember the name of it. It's a little preserve area right off of Beacon Street.
Okay.
A beautiful little area. And we met there and paired off. There was somebody helping me from the senior center. So one girl and one senior would pair off. And I explained how to use a camera. I gave a brief explanation and told them, it's good to look around first before you start shooting and see what appeals to you. And you can handle it however you want as a pair. You can each do the same subject and consult with one another, or you can, however you devise it. And I think it worked pretty well. And of course, the human part of it was particularly touching, especially from the seniors, because some of them, it seemed they really hadn't had close contact with other people, particularly children. So it had two dimensions to it besides the photography dimension. And then we had an exhibit of their work. I printed up the photos. That was fun. I'd love to do another project.
Could you tell us a little bit more about, what is it, the Open Studios, Brookline Open Studios? You've been exhibited there before, correct?
Yeah, I've exhibited almost every year. Yeah, it's changing a bit. It had been, well, it's a volunteer organization, but usually the people who are running it were artists from Brookline and with volunteer help. And I think it became kind of overwhelming about 2 or 3 years ago. So the committee who was running it asked the Brookline Arts Center if they would take it over.
From what I understand and from talking to a lot of people in the area, the art scene in Boston is very, very big. And a lot of people like going to, it's, performing arts, there's visual arts, there's so many different arts in this area. From your own experience, have you seen that kind of stayed the same throughout your 40 years? Has it dipped and kind of come back? Like, what are your thoughts?
I don't know if I'm an expert on that. When I first came here, there was experimental small theaters. I'm not thinking of, these large traveling shows. And I think in the last maybe 20 years, that's been building up. And I think that's great to have small companies and more experimental or new shows, not just musicals or whatever. Yeah, I think the area in SOWA certainly has attracted a lot of people.
I assume you've been to the MFA, correct?
Yes, I have.
You've been a lot.
Oh, yeah, I go a lot.
Yeah, frequent.
I do.
There was this exhibit that was brought to my attention. It's called Women Take the Floor. Have you seen that at all or been there recently to see it?
I haven't seen that yet. I was supposed to go on my husband and I on a big trip, which we didn't, and I just was kind of busy preparing that. So I haven't been to see that.
Yeah, that sounds like just hearing you talk about your work and other things related to women in art. That's something that you might be interested in. I've seen it, and I actually really personally, I liked it a lot. Yeah,
great.
The MFA is. I really think the MFA is a great museum, and I've been to the Metropolitan in New York as well. I've also been abroad. I've seen art in Europe. So seeing Boston have its own museum of fine arts is like really cool, and that's why I asked that question about the art scene in Boston and what you thought, because I do think it is very prevalent here, and people are generally interested in taking part in the arts.
Yeah. Oh, the art museum is fantastic, and it really has moved dramatically in 30 to 40 years from a stuffy old institution with Gilbert. Is that his name? Gilbert Stewart, who did all the portraits of George Washington, to a very exciting, dynamic place. And dealing with contemporary art, finally dealing with some diversity, buying black artists. This man is dead, he's a very close friend of mine who's a lot older than I was, but a New York artist, and a black artist, they have included his work in their collection, which is really great.
Could you talk a little bit about your political infused work?
I've used political themes, let's say, in some of my book art, which we haven't talked about before, but I've done several artist books, which are not books that are published like by the hundreds. They could be just one copy of a book, handmade book, or it could be a very small edition. And one of them was a international project called El Mutanabi, which was about oppression, mostly oppression in the arts and literature in Iran. And they asked various artists if they would do a book, an artist book, based on this subject matter. And that was really a fun and exciting kind of project. And they also had a second project a few years later on doing a print on a similar subject matter. Some of my books are about, one I have is about slavery, I guess, indirectly about slavery, but kind of based on a landscape that I was walking through. And so that's another one I had. There's a local show called Violence Transformed, which usually, where they exhibit it varies, Roxbury Community College or various places. And one year I did a work for that, which was about an Afro-American man who lived underground in the New York subways, very deep underground, and he was an artist and poet, and that was another one. So that's fun. I enjoy doing that. I've also contributed or donated a lot of art, as many artists do, to AIDS Action Committee, several times whenever I get the opportunity, to the Brookline Sister City Project of Quetzalcoatl, I hope I got that pronunciation right, in Nicaragua, which I visited actually a couple of years ago. Whenever either I'm invited to participate in a project or show that has to do with political or social issues, I'm very happy. Or if I get a good idea of my own, I really enjoy that.
You actually touched upon this a little bit earlier when we talked about representing work in museums. The aspect of diversifying exhibits and museums, specifically in the MFA here in Boston, how important do you think it is to have a diverse spread of artists exhibited in a museum?
Oh, it's critical, yeah. I mean, there's so many areas, whether it's dealing with gender issues, which are now much more, prominently displayed, racial, ethnic. Yeah, it's just so long overdue, and I'm really glad it's being expressed. And there's an openness about that.
Yeah, the conversation has kind of been more open, I think. what's your creative process like? How do you think of, your ideas? Where do you get a lot of your ideas from to create your own work?
Let's see. Early on in my graduate school, like after the first year in graduate school, because I really had just jumped into this area of fiber art and I didn't have a lot of experience, someone suggested I go to this summer program in Maine called Haystack, Haystack School of Crafts, which I did. And I don't recall learning particular techniques or getting particular advice or anything like that. It was a workshop environment. We worked in a beautiful place in Maine, right on the ocean. You could work outdoors and indoors. And I just found myself in a very rich creative community, even more so than my graduate school where I was going. So I can describe that example as when you're talking about subject matter or ideas. So here I was in this fantastic landscape that was very different from what I was used to. And I began exploring the rocks and the water and the minutia, like the tiny things like moss and lichen in the woods and barnacles on rocks and tide pools. And it became very, very exciting. And I started photographing them, and then I started just extemporaneously translating them into the medium of weaving.
Right.
Not literally, but just whatever, however I was able to express what I saw and translate it into another form. So that was very exciting. Another part of that subject matter was, besides the miniature kinds of visions, was impressions of larger landscape imagery. So there was an island right off the place where I was that caught on fire, and it was really very dramatic. I mean, there were flames bursting up, and so that was the first large imagist piece that I did based on that kind of thing. And that piece led to another piece, which was more from my imagination, but it was also about trees and fire and things like that. Most of these were abstract, semi-abstract. And that was a very rich experience for me, both supportive. I got a lot of support from other artists I was working with, from the head of the school, and just the whole environment. And the effect of the landscape and the sea was very powerful. And over several years, that continued to be a creative source in a variety of ways for me. So that's one example.
Yeah, and just the aspect of traveling can do a lot for an artist, I think. And the change of scenery from, a city like New York to a city like Boston to up in rural Maine where you went for this excursion with your school. So where else have you traveled before, and what kind of have those experiences done for your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I was very fascinated with Mexico when I was actually a freshman in college, because I had seen paintings by one of the art professors on Mexico, which was, of course, his translation. And I thought, wow, this is great. I'd like to go to Mexico. And a friend of mine who knew I wanted to go said, oh, I heard about a way you can go to Mexico and it's not going to cost you anything, with the American Friends Service Committee. It's a Quaker organization that does service in villages. And so I spent a whole summer there, and this, I don't think I'd ever been in an exotic place before, and that was very, very thrilling. The landscape, the mountains, the vegetation was a very powerful influence on me, but I can't think of like direct, okay, after that I did Mexican-based kinds of things. Later on in my career, when I was teaching at Southern Illinois University, one year I'd been to an art conference in Peru, and that was really exciting because I met people from all over the world. And then I traveled around. I met some people who were in the Peace Corps, and they invited me to visit them in their rural areas. It was really fun. And I met a guy who was a lot older than I, who was head of the arts area of the government, arts and indigenous arts. And he said, oh, if you ever want to come to Guatemala, I'll show you around and all that. So the next year, I asked the people at the museum of the university I worked at if they would give me some money, travel money, and that I would buy them a collection of indigenous fiber art, clothing and this and that. So they did, and that was very exciting. And I went down there. I made contact with this friend I had met and visited a lot of villages, even though I still didn't know Spanish. I don't know how I did it, frankly, because I went alone a lot of the time. And it was a very fantastic experience meeting indigenous artists who were producing the most inventive kind of work.
I actually studied abroad in Rome for 3.5 months, and I had to take a Baroque art history course.
No kidding.
Yeah,
that's
so
fantastic.
I had to,
wow.
The joke I always tell people is I had to learn at least the names, dates, and artists of about 60 different churches, and I could name every single one when I walked around the city.
Wow.
And I went to Barcelona for a weekend.
Oh, that's great.
And I remember saying to myself at one point, I go, this reminds me of Boston. So I really like Boston because it's very European-esque, like the way it's set up. I think like with more open squares and, the common and even just, a lot of the areas are very similar, I think, to a city like Barcelona or like Rome not as much, but
Rome is much larger.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is I think, before I came to Boston, that Boston was very sluggish economically, and they didn't tear down so much and build so much, partly because it just was not such a thriving city economically. It was much more provincial, which turned out to be very good because unlike New York, where whole areas were raised, I mean, there were certain areas that were raised here before I ever came, but a lot was preserved simply because of the economics. So we're really lucky. Yeah, I love Barcelona. I have good friends who live in a town nearby, and I've been there many times.
Nice.
It's great. Oh, I just love it.
From what I've collected, you've had a really long career of a lot of different mediums that you've worked with. You've done, from what I understand, you've done printmaking, you've done, like you mentioned, photography, you've done fiber, you've even done tapestry art.
Tapestry is a fiber art because you're using yarn to create imagery or whatever. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite medium that you typically have worked with before?
Well, I would say, looking back, I haven't done fiber work for a while, but I loved that. I mean, I just really had an affinity. I loved using the materials. I loved the architectural process that you're building and constructing things out of elements which happen to be fiber-like. And I think that was probably the most satisfying part of my life. And I don't know how it is in other fields so much, like music, but I think the principles behind making art are very similar no matter what medium you use, really. So, and what your vision is and what your style flows through whatever medium you choose. So that it's it might seem like, oh, this person is darting from this medium or that, but which may be true, but they're altering their expression because the medium requires that or allows it. But I think their own visual interest, subject matter, style is usually similar.
If there was an artist that you could meet just based off of his or her work, who would that person be?
Well, actually, it's a person I met already. I think I talked about in my 20s, I had encountered this very well-known Uruguayan woodcut artist. His name was Antonio Frasconi, and I just adored him as a teacher. I took a class with him, and he's dead, I'm sure. But I would love to meet him again and have a conversation with him.
Do you mind just telling us where we could find you on the web or in person, where your studio is located, just for our listeners if they want to keep up with you? And
Sure, yeah, I have a website. It's Ruth Ginsberg-Place, Ginsberg. That's different from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Berg. And my studio is the Boston Center for the Arts in Boston at the moment. And yeah.
And do you have any upcoming shows or exhibitions that people could see your work at?
Well, I've applied for 2 group exhibitions, and I don't know if I've gotten into them. One is in a very nice gallery in Lexington, and the other is a place in Brookline, so I'm not sure I'm in them. And I'm thinking of having a one-person show maybe in the coming year, and I'm not sure where or what. And it might be a combination of current work and also some of my tapestry work, particularly a series I did which were autobiographical. So as we were talking about, a lot of my work is landscape, nature-based. A lot of it is autobiographical, coming from my own life experience at the time. So I had done a series of figures which are maybe 7 feet tall. They're pairs. And some of the subject matter was male-female, some was female-female, like kind of linked sister, mother, daughter, whatever. Some was about pregnancy, all very abstracted. And so they're shaped tapestries. So tapestry you usually think of as square or rectilinear. These are shaped forms. And that I've done them a long time ago, but I think it would be kind of fun to do that along with some of my contemporary work.
Great.
So that's what I'm thinking of.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us today. It was really great hearing about your work and your contribution to the Brookline and Boston community. It seems like you've really done a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking on that. And thank you for tuning in for this episode of the Creative Brookline podcast. Again, we were with Ruth Ginsberg-Place. Be on the lookout for her work and her exhibitions right here in Brookline and in the Boston area. Stay tuned for future episodes.